Could a narrow waterway, like barely a blip on a global map, hold the key to either igniting a global war or ending one?
It's a terrifying question, honestly.
Right. I mean, usually when we think of modern conflicts, we picture, armored divisions rolling across borders or hypersonic missiles or cyber warfare units just shutting down national
That's
grids.
true to the skies or to the server farms.
Exactly. But right now, today, the most volatile flashpoint on Earth is literally just a few miles of salty water.
Yeah.
The United States has just issued a strict 48-hour ultimatum to Iran: open the Strait of Hormuz or face direct military strikes on your energy infrastructure.
Which means we are essentially watching a countdown clock on the global economy right now.
Yes, we are. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at the Strait of Hormuz, the key that could end or ignite the Iranian war.
What's fascinating here is that this current standoff is serving as a real-time, incredibly high-stakes stress test for three distinct things.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, it's a test of United States military projection. Second, it's a test of the sheer resilience or maybe the fragility of the global economic system.
Right, the markets are already panicking.
Exactly. And third, it is a definitive test of the limits of Iranian deterrence.
So in this deep dive, we're examining a massive stack of geopolitical reports, market analyses, maritime tracking data, and expert testimonies. Our mission is to figure out how this strait mutated from a quiet commercial shipping lane into a strategic weapon.
And if you're listening to this, you might be wondering, why should you care about a geographical bottleneck halfway across the world?
Yeah, why does this matter to the average person?
You should care because more than 20% of all global oil and liquefied natural gas exports pass through that specific body of water every single day.
20%, that is massive.
It's huge. Any disruption there doesn't just rattle the diplomatic chessboard, it directly impacts your wallet.
Right, it changes the cost of the goods you buy, the fuel in your car, the fundamental stability of the supply chains you rely on.
Exactly. But before we can really unpack the severity of this 48-hour ultimatum, we need to move past the basic geography and look at the actual tactical layout of the water itself.
Yeah, let's look at the map.
Most people look at a map, see that the Strait of Hormuz is about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, and assume, that leaves plenty of room for ships to maneuver.
21 miles sounds like a lot of space.
It does, but that 21-mile width is a complete mirage
Wait, really? Why?
because of the bathymetry, the actual depth of the water.
Ah, okay.
Our sources indicate that fully loaded, very large crude carriers, the industry calls them VLCCs, which carry about 2 million barrels of oil each, they sit nearly 22 meters deep in the water.
Wow, 22 meters underwater, so they can't just sail anywhere they want.
Not at all. The vast majority of the strait is completely unnavigable for vessels of that size. It is filled with shallow shoals, hidden reefs, and really unpredictable currents.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think an analogy helps here.
Go for it.
Imagine the busiest, most vital, multi-lane superhighway in your country. The one that supplies literally all the food, all the fuel, the medicine.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now imagine that highway stretches across a vast, treacherous quicksand swamp. Only 2 lanes of that highway are actually paved, and the rest will just swallow your truck whole.
Right, and to make matters worse, those 2 paved lanes veer directly against the property line of a heavily armed neighbor.
Exactly. A neighbor who happens to be standing on their roof watching every single vehicle that is forced to slow down and squeeze through this narrow alleyway.
That is exactly what's happening. International shipping relies on what's called a traffic separation scheme here.
A TSS, right.
Right. It consists of just a 2-mile wide inbound channel, a 2-mile wide buffer zone, and a 2-mile wide outbound channel.
That is incredibly tight for ships that size.
It's ridiculously tight. The physical properties of the strait force inbound and outbound supertankers directly into it completely strips these massive vessels of their maneuverability. They're locked into a rigid track. And when you have 20 million barrels of oil moving down that track every day, the people on the rooftops, to use your analogy, they don't even have to throw a rock to cause a panic.
They just have to look like they might throw one.
Precisely.
Which perfectly explains how a localized spark just mutated into this massive humanitarian and economic shock in less than a month.
Yeah, the speed of it is staggering.
Let's trace this timeline of escalation based on the sources because it highlights exactly how fragile the whole system is.
Okay, let's walk through it.
So the initial spark of escalation was on February 28th.
Right.
Just a few days later, by March 6th, the tanker traffic through the strait, which is usually dozens of vessels a day, nearly collapsed.
They basically ground to a halt.
And then by March 19th, the situation becomes a full-blown humanitarian crisis. The International Maritime Organization, the IMO, had to step in.
Yeah, they were pleading for a safe maritime corridor just to evacuate thousands of sailors trapped on these floating powder kegs.
Which is terrifying. Then, on March 20th, the global economic shock really hits. Supply chains rupture, oil prices completely surge.
And all of that set the stage for the climax on March 21st and 22nd. The U.S. delivers its 48-hour ultimatum to open the strait, and Iran retaliates by threatening full or selective closure.
Okay, but I want to push back on this a little bit. I want to zero in on that March 6th collapse.
Sure.
Wait, so the strait wasn't physically blockaded with ships or chains, right? Tanker traffic collapsed because the fear of an attack preceded the actual closure.
That is a fundamental reality of modern asymmetric warfare.
But looking at the maritime tracking data from early March, there was no physical wall of warships lined up bow to stern. Nobody strung a giant net across the water.
Right, the water was technically open.
So these are multi-billion-dollar shipping conglomerates moving critical global resources. Why don't they just call the bluff? If the waterway is physically open, why not just sail a massive tanker straight through and dare them to sink it?
Because the shipping conglomerates don't actually make that call. The insurance underwriters in London do.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When a region becomes volatile, organizations like the Joint War Committee in London designate it as a high-risk area.
And once that happens,
The moment that happens, standard maritime insurance policies no longer cover the voyage. Ship owners have to purchase specialized war risk premiums.
and I'm guessing the math on those premiums is what actually stops the ships.
It mathematically forces their hand. I mean, a standard premium might be a tiny fraction of a percent of the hull's value, but under a credible threat of violence, underwriters can demand 1 or even 2% of the ship's total value just for a single 7-day transit.
Which doesn't sound like a lot until you realize the scale we're talking about.
Exactly. If you have a $130 million supertanker carrying $100 million worth of crude oil, a sudden 2% surcharge wipes out the profit margin of the entire voyage instantly.
So you don't even need a physical blockade.
No, not at all. The actuarial tables in a London boardroom shut down the commerce because the financial risk just becomes commercially unviable.
Perception becomes reality, driven purely by economics.
Exactly.
But that leads us to a really fascinating paradox here. If the strait isn't officially closed by, a formal declaration of war, and it isn't physically barricaded, how exactly is Iran actively controlling who gets to go through and who has to drop anchor?
Well, they utilize a highly specific asymmetric tactical toolkit that capitalizes on their geographical high ground.
What's in that toolkit?
We are talking about naval mines, for one, which offer this dangerous degree of plausible deniability because they disrupt navigation silently, without a formal declaration of hostilities.
Right, you hit a mine. Who's to say who put it there or when?
Exactly. Then they deploy swarms of fast attack boats, low-altitude surveillance drones, and anti-ship cruise missiles hidden in mobile launchers along the rugged coastline.
Let me stop you right there, because that raises an obvious question for anyone following military tech.
Okay.
The United States and its allies have billion-dollar Arleigh Burke-class destroyers patrolling that region. These ships have the Aegis combat system, which can track hundreds of targets and shoot down supersonic missiles in the upper atmosphere.
They are incredibly advanced ships, yes.
So why can't a naval destroyer just swat away a few fiberglass speedboats and escort the commercial tankers through?
It comes down to physics and geometry.
How so?
A destroyer's radar is phenomenal at tracking high-altitude threats from 100 miles away. But the Strait of Hormuz is a congested, narrow environment filled with what radar operators call clutter.
Like interference.
Yeah, reflections from the nearby rocky coastline, commercial fishing dhows, choppy waves. When a swarm of, say, 30 fiberglass fast attack boats, which have a tiny radar cross-section, rush a slow-moving tanker from just 2 miles away.
The radar can't pick them out from the waves and the rocks.
Right. The destroyer's sophisticated sensors are essentially blinded by the geography.
That's wild. The billion-dollar tech is completely overwhelmed by cheap, decentralized volume.
Precisely. I mean, a destroyer has close-in weapon systems, but it only takes one explosive-laden speedboat or one low-flying drone slipping through the defensive screen to hit a sluggish tanker carrying millions of gallons of highly flammable liquid.
And the economic damage is done.
The cost-exchange ratio heavily favors the asymmetric attacker here.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because despite all those weapons and the astronomical insurance premiums, the strait isn't actually closed to everyone.
No, it's not.
The intelligence reports we reviewed highlight this massive loophole. Major energy importers, specifically countries like China and India, have reportedly engaged in direct or indirect back-channel contacts with Iran to secure transit exemptions.
Yeah, they are utilizing what the shipping industry calls the dark fleet.
Right. Ships are turning off their automatic identification system transponders. They're spoofing their location data to make it look like they're somewhere else entirely.
And we are seeing the paper ownership of vessels being mysteriously changed overnight.
It's basically the geopolitical equivalent of wearing a fake mustache, right? Yesterday, a ship was Western-owned. Today, it's miraculously registered to a P.O. box in a neutral country using obscure intermediaries.
Hoping nobody looks too closely through the binoculars.
Exactly. So you have this incredibly tense environment where Western-aligned ships are paralyzed, but other tankers are just sliding right through.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are witnessing is the death of a fundamental maritime norm.
Freedom of navigation.
Yes. Transit through the Strait of Hormuz is no longer functioning as a standard commercial right protected by international law. It has mutated into a purely political negotiation.
That is a massive shift.
It is. Access to the global energy market is now being dictated by diplomatic favor, bilateral side deals, and obscured ownership records.
And that shift from an international legal right to an opaque political privilege is precisely what is terrifying the global markets right now.
Without a doubt.
And the economic fallout is immediate. I mean, oil prices breached the $100 per barrel mark almost instantly.
Which triggers inflation across the board.
Hundreds of millions of barrels of oil have effectively been wiped from the global supply chain in just weeks, forcing nations to tap into their strategic emergency reserves just to keep the lights on.
The consensus among the experts and analysts we reviewed is stark. Petit Birol, the executive director of the International Energy Agency, he didn't mince words.
What did he say?
He called this, quote, the largest disruption in the history of the global oil market.
Wow, the largest in history.
Yeah. And he insisted that restoring free passage isn't optional. It is strictly necessary for basic global stability. The entire modern world is built on the assumption that energy will flow uninterrupted.
But the experts seem deeply divided on how to restore that flow.
Very divided.
For instance, Arsenio Dominguez, the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, he issued a clear warning against relying solely on military solutions.
Right, because of the tactical issues we discussed.
Exactly. He pointed out that simply sending military naval fleets to escort commercial ships does not actually ensure safe passage because of the threat of those asymmetric swarms.
Which feeds perfectly into the analysis from Tony Sycamore, a leading market analyst we looked at.
What was his take?
He described the situation as, quote, a ticking bomb of uncertainty. Because the market isn't just reacting to the missing barrels today, it's pricing in the fear of a sudden catastrophic sinking tomorrow. The element of surprise is just as damaging as an actual blockade.
I want you, the listener, to ponder that for a second. If the head of the IMO is stating plainly that advanced military escorts cannot guarantee the safety of civilian ships, can a geographical choke point like this ever truly be secured during wartime?
Or is it fundamentally indefensible by its very nature?
Exactly. It seems like a structural single point of failure.
It absolutely is, and it becomes even more alarming when we pivot to the darkest scenario. What happens when that 48-hour U.S. ultimatum expires?
Right, the clock is ticking.
The Iranian Revolutionary Guard has explicitly stated in public broadcasts that if the U.S. strikes their territory, their retaliation will not be confined to the water.
This is where the contagion effect takes over. If missiles fly, Iran has threatened to expand the battle to the land, to daily life.
We are talking about explicitly targeting regional energy infrastructure, commercial ports linked to U.S. allies across the Gulf, and, critically, massive desalination plants.
The inclusion of desalination plants, that's a massive
It's a terrifying escalation. In the Gulf region, water is life. The vast majority of potable water comes from reverse osmosis and thermal desalination facilities located right on the coast.
These are incredibly complex, highly exposed plants that suck in millions of gallons of seawater every day.
Right. And if a conflict contaminates the local water with oil spills from sunken tankers, or if the power grids feeding those plants are targeted by drones.
Millions of people lose drinking water within 72 hours.
Exactly. Amrita Sen, a leading expert at energy aspects, she warned that this exact pathway could lead to the, quote, widespread destruction of Gulf infrastructure.
So we're looking at the potential collapse of an entire regional ecosystem, not just a delay in global shipping.
And as if that wasn't enough to keep economic planners awake at night, there is a secondary scenario outlined in the reports that is highly dangerous.
The Bab el-Mandeb threat.
Yes. If the conflict explodes in Hormuz, experts are warning there is a high probability of dragging in other regional actors, specifically the Houthis in Yemen.
And they control access to the Red Sea.
Right. They possess the capability and have frequently shown the willingness to threaten another vital maritime choke point, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean.
This raises an important question regarding global logistics. We could soon see a scenario where the global energy supply lanes are squeezed from two completely different directions simultaneously.
Hormuz in the east and Bab el-Mandeb in the south.
If both of those doors are restricted, the cascading failure across European and Asian supply chains would just be unprecedented.
It would be a historic supply shock.
So let's step back and look at the whole board. We've covered a lot of ground today. The overarching narrative here is that the Strait of Hormuz has mutated from an ancient commercial artery into a modern strategic weapon.
And in doing so, it has exposed the glaring vulnerabilities baked into our hyper-connected economy.
We've built a world that demands a constant, uninterrupted flow of energy, but we have routed it through one of the most fragile bottlenecks on the planet.
It brings to mind a profound quote from John F. Kennedy that was highlighted in the historical section of our research.
Oh, I remember this one. Go ahead.
He said, quote, control of the sea means security. Control of the seas can mean peace.
It's a doctrine built on the idea that maritime dominance ensures global stability.
Right. But the chilling modern reality we are analyzing today is the exact inverse. In this highly leveraged geopolitical environment, attempting to forcefully seize control of these narrow seas might actually be the very trigger that guarantees a catastrophic war.
It completely flips that historical perspective on its head. Today, controlling the seas might actually mean war.
This is sobering thought.
It really is. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with something to chew on that builds on what we've talked about today.
What's on your mind?
Well, we spend trillions of dollars developing hypersonic missiles, cyber warfare capabilities, and AI defense systems. We are obsessed with the future of conflict.
Sure, the high-tech stuff.
Yet, as we've seen today, the entire hyper-connected, high-tech global economy can be brought to its knees by who happens to control a few miles of salty water.
It all comes back to basic geography.
Right. So as we look to the future of geopolitics, are we entering an era where ancient geography matters far more than modern military technology?
That's a great question. Will the superpowers of tomorrow be defined not by their weapons, but by who holds the keys to the world's narrowest doors?
Exactly. Are we fixing the structural single point of failure, or are we simply waiting for the quicksand to swallow us?
It's definitely something to think about as this 48-hour clock ticks down.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the sources. We'll catch you on the next one.